I'd like to welcome to the Beauty Seed once again, because the first time I sprung it on Tom Shaw in the middle of what was an innocuous little meet and greet for a 15-minute call. I sprung on him, hey, I'd love to record this. And so I'm really pleased to have Tom back so we can dive into the creative process of word poetry
Mm.
and how that internal churn and internal exploration leads us into a deeper understanding of our place in community and how to engage the outside world from a place of clarity and exploration. So I would love to welcome Tom Shaw to the Beauty Seed. So pleased to have you here. And I thought we might begin with a poem. Welcome to the Beauty Seed. Something to spark our and kindle a conversation.
Yeah, we could do that.
Excellent.
Pleased to be back. Always love chatting with you and being in a space with you, Abe. As we're recording this today, I put out a new poetry book,
Oh, excellent.
and I have a copy here. I came prepared.
It's called
Yeah, I came prepared.
It's called
You
Kindling.
hinted it. Yeah,
Well,
there we go.
we're gonna kindle a conversation around that
indeed.
subject.
And I shared this. There's a poem in it which its title lends itself to the title of the book, and I shared it on Substack earlier today to let people know that this is a thing, and I really love the poem, and I'm going to share it now. And it's called "Lighting the Kindling," and it should light the kindling of this conversation. And it goes a little bit like this:
Excellent.
The thought of fire beckons. Let's gather sticks and bark that the forest gifts us and arrange them just right for a sacred ritual. With careful attention, with dareful ambition, the pyre can take its shape and a flame can cinder. The smell of smoke beckons, an amber in the core, like a pulsating heart, becomes a flickering light to which I give my mind. The haze of all my thoughts, the days of all that wrought, replaced by swirling ash that clarifies instead. The sound of sparks beckons, receiving it gladly, knowing its healing force. In a caressing glow, I come to remember the primal side within, the chiral tides of kin, awash with those warm waves, immersed in energy. The feel of heat beckons. Synchronized, we begin, charging into rhythm. The blazing ring open, I dance in the limelight, playing a better game, chanting a better way. A hearth of heart and earth annealing my old soul. The sight of fire beckons. Let's gather, fellow man, that nature has gifted. They'll arrange themselves right for this sacred ritual. With dareful attention, with careful ambition, the pyre gives up its shape, our inner flame cinders.
Love that. Love that, buddy. And so it begins. As you may or may not know, I have spent a lot of my life as a fire tender, being invited to spaces both ceremonial and in the group, for my crew at the Oregon Country Fair, which is a very large festival I was involved in for a long time, doing fire for a crew of a couple hundred people. I love sitting around the fire here on the property with my friends. I love sitting in front of it alone by myself and introspecting. What is it about the fire that is such a fundamental concept for you in your life?
I found that fire has always welcomed me wherever I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever state I've been in, whatever I've been dealing with, whatever I've been carrying in the course of my day or in the course of the week or beyond, that opportunity to sit by the fire and immerse myself in that experience and be able to check in with myself within that experience, whether by myself or in the company of others,
Mm-hmm.
has always been very healing to me. And I struggle to think of a memory in my life where, in fact, I can't think of a memory within my life where I've been around a fire and not felt relaxed and at ease at the experience,
Mm-hmm.
and welcomed by it and embraced by it. It's where I've found I've been able to reconnect with my soul, my spirit, and to do that check-in.
Yeah,
That is what it is to me.
Yeah, my uncle Dave Chief, who was a native elder here in Oregon when I was growing up, he spoke fluent Lakota most of the time, and his English was good enough. But he spoke of the fire, and that place between the fire and the smoke is where one can enter the realm of the spirit. And to focus there gives us an inroad to inroad to inside ourselves and our connection with a deeper knowledge and understanding of our place in creation. There was something in that the chiral kin.
Yeah.
So
everyone's been picking up on this line.
Well, the chiral aspect is in one sense the the chimera, but it's a mirroring, and
yes.
There is a sense in mirroring from our relations that informs us about ourselves, and through that mirroring within the fire, can you expand on that?
Yeah, so the idea of my understanding of the term that came from chemistry in school, the idea of chiral molecules is that if they're mirrored, they are unique and can't be superimposed on each other.
Mm-hmm.
As the line sort of came to me in one go, and I had this vision of the whole of ancestry coming through in that fire as it has this unique resonance that I can compare to my own existence, but it also provides, there's a continuity there. There are parts I can recognize, but it also provides, I'm also here to experience something new beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that line came from, and I find it interesting that everyone I've shared this poem to has been picking up on that line specifically.
Right.
It's one of the earliest lines that came to me as I was writing it, and it's being conscious of, I knew I was opening up the poem with the idea of connecting with, I guess, the primal nature of man. The idea of all of us coming around a fire is something that's been in our societies for many, many years. Having a conscious awareness and a respect for that. And in the poem, right there, acknowledging it and feeling the energy that it brings, and then going forth and doing something new with it.
Right. I've spent a lot of time in several of the bigger U.S. cities, having traveled around extensively in this country. And I recall very vividly in New York City, over in Brooklyn, I met a group of younger kids who were asking me about my experience growing up in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I grew up about 20 plus miles from a town of 100 people. Pretty remote, about as remote as you can get in America. And talking to these kids about fire, and they're like, fire? You mean like a house fire? I'm like, no, like sitting around a campfire. And they're like, only time I ever seen fire is when some building's on fire. And so there is this kind of disconnect in the modern city world from the elemental and the ancestral relationships. How do you bring that back into your life? You live in the city or you live rurally?
Normally finding myself in cities, but I'm traveling and I'll be in more rural locations for a few months going forward, and definitely some opportunities for some fires there. Yeah, growing up, I was in quite a fortunate position. Sheffield in the UK, where I was a fairly big city, good sizable population, but also bordered a national park. And where our house was, where I grew up, I could either walk half an hour one way and be in the middle of the city, or half an hour another way and then just be on the border of countryside and could just walk straight out there into forests and valleys and whatever. I had this real mix of both worlds. And the scout group I was also a part of growing up was very much, they very much respected the opportunity that was there with the national park, and every opportunity we had, we were always outside doing something. So we did tons of fires. Every camp always had a fire element to it. Big bonfires on bonfire night, which is quite fitting because that's tomorrow here in the UK as we're recording this. So the timing there works out perfectly. So I've those moments of fire for me have always come where I've had a break from the city parts, and it is a returning to a more natural form of being. And the difference I see in the building fires or the house fires of the cities is those fires haven't been started with intention, and they've not been using natural materials. So there's those two sort of big things that jump out to me. There is what I would feel is different about the campfires and the this sort of fire that I've got on the front of the book, as opposed to the a building fire or something started unintentionally.
Right. Then there's the intentional fire, the proverbial fire of this digital space that we find ourselves in, and how much, I met you through the Conscious Peoples Network as mentors in that group, which led me into your work as one of the founders of Over to the Youth. How much of your sense of sitting around a fire informs the type of space you create in the mentoring? And maybe tell us a little bit about Over to the Youth and that mentoring space. And I think there's a correlation there of how it is that we come into these online spaces with the need to connect, in a sense, like we're sitting around a fire, albeit a digital fire, to kind of synthesize the synthetic. You know what I mean? So
I get you. Yeah. So I can certainly look to a lot of my campfire experiences and see creating a welcoming environment that everyone brings something into that space, into the circle that's created there. And there's definitely a parallel there with what we do with Over to the Youth, with the spaces there, where the youth that we work with, currently 18 to 25, expanding next year to 13 to 17, we have a space and a check-in where everyone brings in what's the life for them, what is the fire that's burning within them, what is it they're feeling, and building that into feeding that into the fire of the space, giving it fuel to bring those ideas to life, to blaze. We can then all feel the heat from that and explore from there. So that's something that really, it sets the tone of the space well. And then we have our facilitators and mentors in those space who can guide the conversation as things come up, almost like they're stewarding the fire. If there's if it's starting to die out in one area, maybe we can throw another log on with another perspective or idea to open it back up. Or if it's getting a bit too blazing in one area, what could we use to help bring some calm back into the situation without extinguishing the fire entirely?
Always got to have the breath.
Yes, and allowing that, but all that while still allowing that burning, that transformation of what is in the material we're feeding it into this exploration, this idea, and what is born out of that.
What is born out of that?
A sense of progress, a sense of moving forward, a sense of first, and I would say a lightening, as a burning off of things that I and other people who go into those spaces are carrying that no longer serves us. And then with that, a light to somewhere else, to a new road, a new opportunity.
A bridge.
Yeah. It's those things for me. And it seems to be those things for a lot of people who come to those spaces.
Yeah, I'm reminded of what you're saying. I'm reminded of the metaphors of alchemy. And
that's been on my mind a lot recently. And as it would have been in my periphery for a while anyways. And then Stephen Young's recent book really captured my interest, and I picked up a copy from him when I saw him out in Serbia.
Excellent. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah.
He's great.
Humble guy as well. Really lovely. And that book was just the book I needed to dive into that. Fire is that energy, part of that transformation. The alchemist's work is with fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Stephen was at Music and Sky, a place where I happened to tend fire. And nice. Really a lovely guy. I love the work of alchemy in its transmutation of the inner work, the refinement and reification of our own internal perspectives and processes, and building a balance within an oppositional realm. So what in your process of poetry can you equate that, or can you equate that to alchemy in some way, or is that what is that process?
I guess it's turning the words and the phrases or taking the ideas and the experiences that I've witnessed and experienced in life as the prima materia, raw material, giving it words and phrases and language to transmute that into an art that speaks to something greater and that is transformative for me in that process as well. My poems, first and foremost, are an exploration of what the hell have I just experienced and how am I going to make sense of it.
Yeah,
that's what it is to me.
Right. I did attend one of your workshops, and so there's the substantive aspect of what informs our process. How do you bridge your own process with teaching others to engage that space?
So in terms of teaching, I can call it that. I'm always keen to show off how I do that process for myself, for the things that I work through. And that requires me to go into those spaces with a vulnerability to say, look, this is what I'm working on at the moment that I'm unsure about, and that's causing me problems. And here's some of the things that I could do to try and make sense of it.
Right.
and leading by example. That's the, I guess, the crux of how I try to translate it. And if something I do doesn't land for someone else, it doesn't land for them. But at least they know that it doesn't land for them, and that there's a different perspective or framing that might work for them.
Yeah, there's meat there for sure. Did you, if you did happen to watch Harry, Jerry, and the Tall Poppy, anybody watching, I invite you to check that out. It expresses well the relationship, one of the many relationships I've had with poetry through my life. Are there any times that you can remember where the act of sitting down to process something that happened through poetry was really particularly profound for you?
In terms of writing poetry, I can, in my first book that I did, I had a poem in there called Born Anew, and I wrote it as a lullaby to what I would want to sing to my future children, and hopefully children beyond them. And I wrote that at a time of trying to find purpose and meaning in life. And wanting to have something that was worth paying forward. And it was in writing that it gave me a sense of purpose to keep going and keep fighting on at a time that I was struggling to. It was a process of finding worth in myself. To say, I have this power to do to give something beautiful to someone beyond me. That it was in the process of writing that piece that I could recognize that.
Right. Words, as you may know, I work a lot with the power of words. Abracadabra. With my word, I create. And so, yeah, in poetry, there's this bridge between, like, to put it in modern terms, the right and the left brain. There's this symbolic reference mixed with the logical in, the substance of the word being the imagery and the contextual elements, and then the meanings that we ascribe to them being that left brain thing. Do you use particular formula in how you approach poems typically, or do you kind of start? What is your process of that?
I tend to start with the ideas or topics and themes and ideas I want to talk about. Maybe certain sayings that have come to mind that I've wanted to explore. And sometimes in those explorations and expanding out, free verse is fine. Sometimes I want to go for more metered and structured formats, and I have no real rhyme or reason as to why I choose to do ones at certain times. It's just whatever feels right. I've had a couple of times in the past where I've deliberately wanted to explore using certain forms and patterns, and sometimes the context of some of those more well-known forms like sonnets is fun to play with. I have one on my Substack, production line sonnet, which I deliberately play with the idea of sonnets generally being associated with love, to twist that into a love for a mechanization of society that seems to have happened. Like the twisted inversion. I had a lot of fun with that.
Nice.
It's things like that. It's very contextual depending on the ideas and the themes I'm working with, but it starts from there, and it starts from that feeling and from an inner place of what is it I'm wanting to explore.
Right. Form follows function.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. I have not studied the form of poetry other than reading it particularly. I mean, I particularly love Hafiz, and I love Rumi, and I'm really drawn in reading poetry to the the Persians and that region of the world. Are there any particular poets that draw you in, and in particular?
I often find myself really in awe at a lot of Edgar Allan Poe's poetry.
Oh,
which is interesting, which is more recent. The times when I realized how powerful poetry can be, I was blessed with a phenomenal English teacher in secondary school, and two of the poems that we had on our syllabus were Percy B. Shelley's Ozymandias, which is a fantastic poem, and an extract from Wordsworth's The Prelude. And they were...
I'm trying to remember that one. Can you give me a overview, a little overview?
Yeah. So it's I opened with the poetry workshop with it.
Oh, gotcha. Yep.
Yeah, taking the
how about for our audience?
The boat from under the willow tree.
Oh, yes.
And having this in the middle of the night and having a huge mountain rise.
That was a fantastic poem, by the way. I invite anybody watching to look that poem up and give it a thorough read, because it's phenomenal. So anyway, Wordsworth being one of them.
Yeah, so I remember those two poems was the first time I really had a sense of, wow, this is the power of emotion and of the power of poetry to convey emotion and ideas and experience. In two very different poems, both saying very different things, but both equally striking to me.
What was striking about them?
Well, for Wordsworth's The Prelude, just the rawness and that willingness to talk about his vulnerability in that moment, to say, in that moment, something I would describe as spiritual happened, or something that came to his mind that has then wrought his thoughts for days afterwards, and of the sight of the huge and mighty form that does not live like living men in his mind for days on end after that, and the darkness of it. There's something so powerful about that image that really struck me. And then for Ozymandias, Shelley's poem, that was really the power of just the elegance of how he communicated the pitfalls of pride, the tyrant who, however many years ago, thought, my reign will live forever. Here is my empire. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. And it's a crumbled civilization in the desert that's told to the narrator from a traveler who's been there. It's not even him in the first person describing it. It's coming as a second-hand account. And just that the distance there and the elegance to describe that in 14 lines, I think, is just phenomenal.
Right.
And says so much to me about the fall of empires that I feel is still very relevant today.
One might presume that we're in the middle of it.
Quite possibly.
seems plausible. I tend to look inward, and in that inward exploration, I see the reconstruction and the reification and the refinement. A lot of words there. These processes within me, I see them in the external world, and they remind me to be mindful of the space within myself and how I create a part of that. That's not to say that I create the entirety of my experience. I think we all have a sympathetic resonant field that interacts with each other through that. Yeah, there's a sense in in both those poems, in my limited knowledge of them, of this holographic nature, not to get too overly technical, but the encapsulation of very large feelings, emotions, concepts, ideas into this very focused and pointed thing that we could take that experience and unpack it for years to get at the meat of all that is there. And, I have a tendency to write in my poetry in a very dense, packed fashion. One of my mentors, Blue, who's Robert Stockley, said to me once, he was reading one of my poems. It's like, there's too much there. It's like I'm overwhelmed with how much information is in this one line. And yeah. So how do you ride that line between telling and allowing an invitation for other people to explore what you have experienced? Do you get the nature of the question?
I get the question. Although it's not something I think about too much. At the end of the day, if I write something that I know has shifted something in me, I trust that it may do that in someone else, and it'll do exactly what it needs to. And I'm not someone who, for my own understanding, I don't try. I work with a lot of ideas, but I do try and boil down a lot of it to, okay, what is paraphernalia that I'm adding on for whatever reason, and what is the core of what I'm feeling here. That is a lot of my process anyways. And so the poetry that comes out is a reflection of me saying, okay, what is the simplest ideas and metaphors I can bring this down to for the fragment of what I'm experiencing and feeling.
Yeah, that brings to mind a poem that I wrote many years ago while I was staying at my dad's on the Gulf Coast of the United States, down the Gulf of Mexico in Alabama. The Redneck Riviera, as it's called.
I'm sold on the title alone.
Yeah, it's an interesting place. The hot, lazy breeze waves my passions like a limp flag in a small town parade. So yeah, the images of boiling it down to a few elements. I love that process, and in what you're saying, I see this in myself as well. That there is a sense that I do it because I have to, and I trust that it's a process I need to go through, and if someone else garners value out of that, is great, and it's not my responsibility whether they do or don't. So sound accurate? Yeah. Cool. So yeah, the workshops in the online space, what has been the most profound value of working in that space for you?
For me, it's when I've been able to see changes in the people whose lives I've been a part of for those moments, to share some of how it is that I go about it, and to have those constructs where I've written something or worked through an idea and then had that space to share that. That's been the greatest reward for me of this kind of work, both in the workshops and poetry wise that I run, and in the spaces for Over to the Youth. It's seeing the growth and the changes in other people that I can tell, and they can tell me, has shifted things for the better for them. And that I'm incredibly humbled and honored to have those experiences with people. And that is my measure of success.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how, well, one, how did that come about? And what was the process of cultivating, because there is a sense of like gardening, of cultivating those kinds of
Mhm.
spaces and inviting people into them and momentum and all of these things. How was that for you and Uvius and whoever else was involved to get that process going? And what's it like maintaining that momentum in the online space?
Yeah, so in terms of Over to the Youth, that began as a project in 2022. And so there's been lots of still meeting weekly then.
Mm-hmm.
And in that entire time, just experimenting with, okay, what is it we can bring into the space? What works? What doesn't?
Mm-hmm.
How can we bring out more of what is working and the things we do bring in that is working and supporting that? And being gifted with
Well,
great mentors in that process as well.
can you give me examples of things that you kept and things that you weeded out?
Yeah, so the check-ins was a huge thing, giving everyone that opportunity to bring in something into the space that they're working with, and for everyone else to hold a space for that to be honored, whatever it is, whatever that's live, and an opportunity for everyone to define how they want to be seen,
Mm-hmm.
and to create and to put forth the version of themselves that they feel is as genuine as they can reach. That's been really huge and has been a staple of our entire time, and something that would never go. Something we did have in earlier versions of Over to the Youth was a group chat for messages to go back and forth outside of the spaces that we had.
Mm-hmm.
And we no longer do, because the kinds of conversations that we had, okay, we can have a laugh at a meme and stuff, but it wasn't conducive to the real heart to heart soulful relation work that we were doing in the gatherings and that
What do you
we
think?
really wanted to prioritize.
I've noticed this in other groups, and I can speak to that if you want me to. And
Yeah,
I'm
go for
curious.
it.
Well, first, I'm curious what you observed in that texting space of back and forth. What kind of energy does that bring into it, and why do you think that is so ineffective for accurately getting the connection going?
Well, one is the lack of communicative elements that go into it. All the non-verbal communication is completely lost in those
Right.
spaces, which conveys so much of how I can feel about a certain idea, which words I'm emphasizing, and what that says about what it is I'm trying to communicate. And so that element is lost as well. And so it creates a lot more, it's perhaps open to a lot more interpretations that weren't intended on the receiving end.
Right.
And also the lack of, the way I felt it, the lack of having a face that I could see on the other end and a mouth that's vocalizing the words at the same time that I'm hearing them.
Yeah.
There's the lack of accountability and responsibility for the words I speak, to know that, okay, what it is that I'm saying and the ideas I'm putting forward, here I am right in front of someone who I may have to be directly accountable to exploring those ideas more, or if I put forward a position that, or a boundary that I want to stand in, I know that I can see the person across from me who I've got to be willing to stand in that boundary for.
Mm-hmm.
And in a group chat space that's devoid of that time and that space to do that, I think it seemed a lot easier for certain people to choke out the space and others not be seen.
Mm-hmm.
To not be able to, easy for others to drop out when they've conversations, even when they've got something meaningful to bring. to not be able to rein in others who are taking up a lot of the conversation space and giving an opportunity for other people to come in, which is it's so much easier to do when we're in a live format like this. And
especially since I can just reach up here and I can mute Tom. See? No. You can unmute yourself.
I like that it comes up that the host has asked you if you would like to unmute.
I don't mean to be a controlling little bastard. I've been conditioned that way by the world. And there is a lot of conditioning in the world to, the what you're speaking to seems to me to be that there is this public forum, but in that it allows the lesser angels of our nature, as you might have heard it said, or the greater angels of our nature, to express themselves in different ways. And in that context, it seems like many people have a hard time or a difficulty maintaining their own acknowledgement and responsibility to respond, and it becomes a very reactionary space, or a space that those who are less aggressive with their discernment are less likely to engage with keeping an open conversation going. Mm-hmm. It does seem to close off and kind of refine down to the more negative aspects as a medium. I think it's in the nature of the medium in some sense, and it takes a lot of cultivating and attention to maintain clear conversation in that space. I found it very interesting. And there's an over-reliance on the form of the thing rather than the substantive aspects of what is there. And I think that the issue arises that very few people seem to have space to listen to their own language or read their own language, to weed out the baggage and bullshit that colors the engagement and interaction that they have. And they're having a reactionary interaction rather than the interaction that they want to have. And it's a lot of autopilot seems to go on in the transition between here and the hand. It's interesting. And there are some cognitive differentials between using a pen and using a keyboard that I think also come into play, and some technological entrainment that also comes into play. But mostly I think it's that people have not been taught, as you've attended a workshop of mine, have not been taught how to become cognizant of their own language landscape and the embattled nature of the tendencies and habituated language use that presents itself in these places in a very conflicted way. And it leads to conflicted conversations. Anyway, I really need to pee, so we'll be right back. Tom, if you have something to say.
I'd break.
I'll be right back. Oh, wow. Thank you for your patience.
That's all right.
So I did coursework with the Sovereign's Way a number of years ago, and fantastic course. A lot, very deep and informative about our relationships with the world. And there was an online chat associated with that group on Telegram. And I think there was a Discord as well, which I did not. I mean, inherent in that name is fairly telling. So Greg Paul, who is one of the instructors or the guides for that course, that knowledge share, removed himself from that space, and his presentment was, in a sense, and I'm not speaking for him, this is my interpretation of what he said, was in a sense that this is inner work, an inner understanding, an inner comprehension of our where we stand in relationship to God, and that informing our relationship externally to the world, and nobody else can do that for you. And I totally agree with that. And in that presentment, he thought that, in some sense, seemingly thought that these spaces were of little or no use in this discernment. Now, for me, I didn't find that entirely accurate, because if that were true, why would we be born into a realm of opposition and this chiral kin, this relationship we have to the family and community relationships and all of that, in opposition, we are afforded the ability to reflect and see ourselves more thoroughly. Does that, what do you have to say to that? Does that,
in terms of the ability of those group chats to
be informative in some way? Yeah.
It always seems like those kind of group chats they're fine, or those mediums are fine for specific information or perhaps starting points, prompts, but the actual meat of the conversation, so much that I seem to find benefits from having flow and from having and knowing that I'm talking to another human being, and I can see that, and I'm reminded of it, and I'm in the presence of it constantly. This sort of space over Zoom is a lot better than that. Still not as perfect as if we were in the same room physically having that conversation, and having the extra senses and awareness of each other's presence to add to that.
Yeah. There's I tend to agree with him by and large in the space of Telegram and those types of things, where there is the feedback isn't there to keep people accountable, and it does have a tendency, and it's not always, but a tendency to lead people into this kind of codependent space where they're propping up bad behavior in this kind of leading into an echo chamber type of thing. I'm still feeling out its usefulness for me. I engage it to some degree, as you know, and minimally. But curious how that
and they are spaces that egos and unmet needs to be seen and heard. There could be that dopamine immediate sense of gratification for someone to put out a message and to be like, oh, I've been seen, I've been heard, but there's no exploration on top of it. And if there's an ego that comes through there, and it's very difficult for anyone else to challenge it, because by definition it chokes out the space, and it's hard to rein someone in on that, or to create a container to properly explore it. That's not healthy.
Yeah.
To my mind.
That's kind of like what I think I touched on it before, this concept of synthetic into synthesis. And so it's synthetic to the degree that our attention and awareness is lacking in discernment of the space. And once we see it for what it is, as a tool, like fire, then we can bring it into synthesis. And once we have synthesis, then it can be a useful tool, in so much as other people have also brought it into synthesis. Right. And so I suppose there is a certain curating that goes on in maintaining that space that I find takes a little more energy than I'm willing to put into it. Though I loved your analogy of in the space of over to the youth, there's putting another piece of wood on the fire in the sense of adding a word here or a word there. Is interesting to me. It's a cool analogy for the stewardship of those spaces. I dug that.
Yeah, and it's something else is when we're all in that presence at the same place at the same time. I and others can respond dynamically to the rate of the fire. When it's in a group chat, there's the disconnect between how
the rhythm,
the rhythm, and the way people can respond to that flow, which has its own impact as well.
Oh, I love that insight. That's fantastic, because there is a rhythm to life. I mean, it's one of the Hermetic principles, one of the natural laws, really the law of rhythm. It's like you go to the ocean and you have that rhythm of the waves. You look at the fire, you have the flicker of that fire. You look at the light bulb and it has a different flicker, and within that there's the range of different types of light bulbs, and those all engage with the rhythm we have internally. And, the Heart Math Institute's bioentrainment methodology of linking up brain waves with the rhythm of your breath or the rhythm of somebody else's rate of speech, or there's all of these concepts of rhythm that are at play all the time, and I feel like it's really valuable to attend where those are used and where we use them. I use it for instance, in the workshops and coaching. I use the rhythm of my own breathing to affect that space. The pause, the breath, the nature of that breath. You'll very seldom see me take a breath like very different energy than
it just looks painful as well.
There's a lot in how it is that we hold our breath and how it is that we let it out. There's a lot there.
Another thing in terms of the rhythm that jumped out from your workshop was the opportunity to the ideas and the narratives that I might tell myself, to read that back at a different rhythm and at a different pace, to elucidate something else that might not have been there otherwise,
right?
To give room for something else to breathe.
Yeah, it's like there's an extreme difference to be seen in respect. I'm going to put it in like a musical analogy. It's like disco on the one hand, like Saturday Night Fever soundtrack is a rhythm, and Bach is a rhythm. And they might be talking about the same things. Maybe a poor analogy, but they might be talking about the same things, but that rate at which they talk about them affects how we are able to respond and be with the concept that's being portrayed. And so by attending our own story in such a way, we can actually look at how our rhythm is affected in our breath, in our body, in our rate of speech. And that creates a space. And that space allows a clarity to enter. And so by slowing down, we literally and figuratively and emotionally are creating a space through which our attention can step into that space that we've created. To really look between what is going on and at what's going on and through what's going on, to see where its tendrils and ties and roots and branches and leaves and its expression. How does this express in my life?
Where is it drawing its breath from?
It's powerful to to slow down every once in a while. And I think there is an expediency to the texted message and ease that is somehow less meaningful often. Right. So
yeah, I agree. It's an opportunity to, as I see it, to just push the concept or whatever's on the forefront out there without doing the full work internally, to give it a slower the rhythm, to see what else emerges from it. It's an avoidance of facing it, to push it out as a message rather than to really work with it and to let it breathe and to tease out the best qualities of it.
Yeah, there is in that this implication. And that implication is that, and I think it's true personally, that implication is that the rhythm of our intent substantively affects our output, our instigation into whatever space we happen to be putting our word into. And so that interior space, whether if there's clarity there, then there's more or less clarity within our presentment. If there isn't, and you got a 1,000-mile-an-hour story going on, it's hard to put space and clarity into those fruits that we put out in the world.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you feel like the act of, to bring it back to where we started, do you feel like the act of poetry and writing poetry has allowed you more space within yourself to articulate more clearly day to day?
Yes. I'm not quite sure if I can give specific examples. It certainly frees up a lot of the ideas that I'd otherwise be lingering onto in my consciousness, and it creates more space for the meaningful dialogues and for me to be able to craft my speech to best convey my intent. It's certainly it keeps more interesting vocabulary and words alive as well, which is I just see those as different tools for conveying my intention. And if I've got a broader toolbox at my disposal, even better.
Yeah. Do you find yourself in conversation removing words that are not in common use in order to convey things more easily? Or do you still go to those words with the hope or the desire for people to ask for clarification if they don't know what your word means?
Something I've not really thought about. It's if I can tell it that something sometimes people will say to me, I don't get what you mean by that. And in which case it's obvious. Sometimes people are a lot quieter about it, and I can tell from their emotions that it's not quite settled, it's not worked for them. There's just a fun exploration to see, okay, can I find other words that also adequately convey what it is I'm trying to say? There's a fun challenge there. My first round is always to go with what feels most alive and most accurate for me in a way that makes sense as to how I communicate it. If that really doesn't land with someone, then yeah, it's a fun challenge to see, okay, can we make it make sense?
I was accused the other day, well, not accused, but mildly, of using a lot of 25-cent words, which I told him, well, because of inflation, they're now 50-cent words.
Nice.
And I do consider that, and I go, oh, this is the most accurate way to describe it, and I'm going to let the space allow for people to ask for clarification if they need it, and move forward in a way where I assume, in some sense, that my audience is intelligent.
Mm,
You know,
yeah,
and if I dumb down my language, then there's an assumption in that I think they're not capable of moving into that space.
I definitely feel if I try and do that, it does carry through.
Mm-hmm.
There's a projection of how I feel about the other person that comes through in that.
Right. It's a fascinating little slice that I've been attending lately.
Yeah.
More so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way it's been manifesting most for me is I'm consciously substituting legalese that's fallen into common use into alternatives that aren't legalese based, replacing anything that's something shit for something ing wherever I can. It's actually been a lot of what's been consciously on my mind, or even the words understand.
I really value our friendship. Well, yeah, I understand. There's a lot of words that are conflated and miscomprehended, misappropriated. There's all these. These are often used in the legal terminology. Do you comprehend and do you understand? Are they the same thing? Are they? You were pointing at this, and so I'll go there. The act of understanding, if you parse the word, means to stand under.
Yes.
The one qualifies the other. What precedes qualifies that which comes former of it. So understand. I am under that standing. And what is standing in law? Standing is your ability to know the territory that you are upon.
Yes.
Are you in it or are you upon it? Actually, that's a great distinction. Are you upon the land or are you in the land? If you're in the land, that means, well, the only time I know I'm going to be in the land is if somebody buries me. Right?
You're a dead entity.
Well, there is a lot there. There's a lot there. Yeah, dead entities, corporations.
Yeah.
And you spoke to this before, and I was going to touch on it, and we moved on. But how it is we choose to identify and present. And so there's a lot of invitations to take on externalized identities, titles that bring us out of the relationship with who it is that we are fundamentally. This relationship we have with creation and with our those of mankind into those persons and their ens legis, as it were, that are operating sometimes to our benefit and sometimes in breach of trust. Yeah, have you dug into this much?
Little bits and pieces. Only very surface level. Enough to know that there's a few words and terms and ideas that I could watch out for. I was interested from a language perspective going into it. I do have an interest in terms of how I interface with certain groups and collectives and other, I guess, parties. If it does step into that realm, that's my main interest has been the language side of it, and a knowledge that there's a lot of words that have fallen into our vocabulary that stem from that. And sometimes I don't have a better alternative than to use something I know that comes from that. Something it's interesting that something I'm finding myself doing a lot more as a good example is calling it mentoring and not mentorship.
Yeah.
to take out the ship and to bring in an aspect of there's an action there, there's a craft to it. Just little things, and like in an instance like that, that's still going to be other people are still gonna get what that means. There's still the mentoring there. You can see I was avoiding understand there.
It sounds like you comprehend why. There is this fine line, and I was thinking on this earlier today, actually. There's this substantive aspect that informs this edge space between the saber and the pen. And we can often overanalyze what the inform is. It brings it into form, but what brings it into form is the intention we have underwriting that word. And in law, you have this concept, substance over form, or intent over form.
Yes.
Wherein, the why is as important, if not more important, than the outcome of how you present it.
I agree.
Meaning that your own relationship with the energy that you're creating with that word is of great importance in how that is perceived and how it is recognized. Meaning somebody else is taking that in to recognize it and make it cognizant within themselves. So we can go through our language with a fine-tooth comb, and that can be entertaining. It can be
my value. Well, the value I see in it is the intention is the main thing. So I'm not going to beat myself up over it if I do get something wrong. However, I say wrong if I use one of those terms. Right. However, having the best tools I can to convey my intention is of interest to me.
Yeah, it's like the wrong is a prime example of one of those words that is often used in place of incorrect. And on some level, because we all have a collective momentum and habituation to these words, there is an energy collectively that is created by certain words. And so I choose to use incorrect in most senses, and wrong as a illustration of something that is an affront and that has the energy of stepping towards a trespass. Whereas incorrect is, okay, I made a mistake and I'm correcting that mistake and acknowledging that my thinking and energy behind it was not in the right trajectory. So there's this dance that is there that is kind of like engaging in the music of the territory of language, where there's the internal knowledge and gnosis of our own energy allows us to dance with that more freely. And without that, then we have there's more and more weight on the actuality of the dictionary definition of that word, because we have externalized our process. Therefore, we're reliant on externalities, which is, in this sense, emblematic of the dictionary, which defines the terrain externally. Right. And, I do love exploring that map.
Yes.
It's a map of the territory. So it's easy to confuse the two.
It is a challenge that allows me to hone skills and to pick up something else and to gain a new perspective, possibly. to have a different word that by its very nature is going to do something different energetically as I convey it. I just love exploring that.
Yeah.
Super cool. And something I'm thinking about more and more is both words from other languages and where they convey things that in English we can't.
Well, or words that come from in other languages that English has adopted.
Yes, that too.
My brother loves the joke. You know the problem with the French. They haven't got a word for entrepreneur. and in that witticism is a great truth that much of English is borrowed from other languages. Well, one might even make the claim that most of English is borrowed from other languages and a mishmash of different concepts and linguistic trees. And so etymology, not entomology. This bugs me, the differentiation between the two. Etymology is really a fascinating dive in terms of English because it broadens this wide scope of how it is that we come to these synthesis of different languages within the framework of English as the adopted language of the legal world of contract. And it is contracted. It is this expansive multiplicity of languages, the Babel, so to speak, into this collapsed dynamic that has less expression in some sense until you develop the tool set of expanding it out and breaking it out into its different tributaries.
Yes.
The Latinates and the Germanic and the Persian and the different branches of that linguistic tree and how they moved and flowed into each other to create this amalgamation is super fascinating to me. And there's a lot of depth there in how it is that we come to understand these broader terms in our lives and how that plays out in standing and where we stand is super fascinating to me. I do love it. Next week, I'm interviewing my friend and mentor, Mark England, and I'm sure we'll touch on language. He's the founder of Enlifted, which is a methodology of language integration, part of which was the workshop that you were involved in. Mindset, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves to ourselves, and those are made up of words. And words are spells, and a spell is a word or series of words of great influence. And how are those words emotionally held in the motion of our trajectory in life, in our habituated process of the language we use, is so informed by unpacking the meanings of the words we use. Have you done much in diving into etymology, and has that informed your
not too much? No, it's something I absolutely have a calling for, though, and I'll be watching that interview with great interest.
Oh, good. Yeah, he's a funny dude.
Yeah, and I find I find the concept of how words are born and how words die being very interesting as well. And funnily enough, I think about, on that topic, the number of words that Shakespeare invented and brought into language. And that is, a lot of that work is poetry. His plays and his pieces were poetic in their very nature.
they were also, they were also fiction.
Yes.
In some sense, historical fiction with a lot of fact played into it. But yeah, there's a whole slew of meat there in how fiction can be used to sway the audience towards presuppositions that may or may not be accurate to the actuality of life. And it's, in a sense, like taking your poetry in, which is kind of a fictional representation of your experience, over to the youth, into this mentoring space. Is that taking fiction into integration allows us to move through the fiction to look at how it actually plays out in our life, so that we can know for ourselves, which allows us to be less inclined to be swayed by the narrative path and direction of others. Does that ring to you?
Yeah. Well, fiction is both a narrative and a metaphor.
Isn't it?
It's the combination of the two. And I have a narrative that I construct for myself about what's happening around me and within me and how I move through that space. And I have metaphors that I use as part of that to make sense of it. So, yeah, of course, fiction can do that, and exploring how that happens with fiction and what I can tease out of that to inform the narrative that I create of my own life is super key. And it's why I find myself looking back at fiction more so than I do historical accounts of things, with the odd exception of what of history has been uncovered. But funnily enough, I actually go into those spaces thinking, wouldn't it be cool to make some sort of fictional representation that revives a lot of these ideas? I think a lot about that, interestingly. Yeah, I don't think it's any coincidence that, well, when COVID rolled around, look at the number of people who made the 1984 comparison.
Right.
Work of fiction. But, that's, you just say 1984, and for so many people who've read and got a working knowledge of that book, it was just like, yes.
Yeah.
Conveyed in a few syllables an entire sentiment.
Well, to take that further, there's a work of nonfiction by George Orwell. I can't remember the name of it right this second. And it was in regards to his time he spent kind of on the fringe of communism, socialism in his description, in the Spanish Revolution.
Oh,
and it's his account of it.
Homage to Catalonia, is it?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Fantastic read. One of the things that is highlighted in that is how he was getting reports of what was being printed in the newspapers back home, and how his observation on the ground were completely contrary to each other. Mm-hmm. And so these things that we take as truth in the media, in the articles of record of newspapers and television and all of those things in this day and age, it takes a lot of discernment to weed out and parse whether that be fiction or not. And I think actually we might do well to look at it as fiction to begin with, and to look at it through the lens of fiction as, oh, this is a narrative. What are the presuppositions that are being presented to me through this narrative? And how can I verify the claims of this fictional account? Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's a great read. I recommend it to anybody who wants to get a glimpse of the functionality of that relationship of our own observations, the empirical method of science and the narrative and story of science, and how the two seldom meet presently. Is fascinating to me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, Orwell. There's I could go on more tangents. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. Do you have any other anything else you wanted to touch on?
So many things that I could touch on, but nothing that I absolutely need to touch on. I could close off with a poem, not one of mine, but something that a piece that came to mind to me. I guess to bring it back around to the
excellent
alchemy and the creation of God that we touched earlier. Mm-hmm. That's when it came to mind.
Well, first off, let everybody know where can they find your Substack.
Yes, thank you for reminding me to.
And where can they get your book? We'll put it in the show notes, obviously, and I love to hear it from you.
Yeah, so tomshawwritings.substack.com. That's Substack at Tom Shaw Writings, whatever's easier for you to find. Mm-hmm. The book is on my website, which is even easier to remember, tom-shaw.uk.
Dash as in hyphen?
Hyphen, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, pretty easy. Yeah. So that's all that. It should be pretty straightforward.
And if anybody's interested in the mentoring, how do they find that?
Yeah. So over to theyouth.com is where we do the work with youth. And mm-hmm. we've got big plans coming up. Very excited we'll be sharing those very soon.
Excellent. And I also will be doing number 2 of a series of workshops.
You graced us with a wonderful session.
Yeah, it was great fun for me.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad to hear.
Yeah,
everyone I know went along found it super valuable, and those who weren't able to make it are excited to try and come in for part 2 and gleam a little bit.
Yeah, I will be for anybody listening who's interested. I will be doing more within the next couple weeks. I'll put it out in the usual places. If you're interested, I invite you all to attend. How about a poem?
Yeah, this is one of my favorites, one I really like, by Amos Russell Wells, called Talk is Cheap. And I think it rounds out a lot of the stuff that we touched upon today in quite a nice way. And it goes a little like this. When the tongue with ready art bodies forth a servile heart, when its vows forgotten fade, speedily as they are made, when it raises honour high, but its own life is a lie, when big words from nothing leap, talk is cheap, for life is cheap. When the tongue with carefulness tells the truth, nor more nor less, when it boldly dares to speak for the wrong and for the weak, when with modesty and grace talk adorns a homely place, when it comes from sources deep, talk is anything but cheap. Speech is silver, sages sing. Silence is a golden thing. Other doctrine I do hold. Talk is gold when life is gold.
And with that, we are humbled to be clear with our expression in the world. Tom Shaw, thank you so much for joining me and everybody for this wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it. I enjoy you. I'm sure we'll be seeing each other again very soon. And with that, I bid everyone farewell wherever you find yourselves upon this great and wonderful realm, and abide in nature.
Is it upon this realm or within this realm?
That's up to each and every one of us to discern for ourselves. And so go in grace, and my love be upon you. All right. So much love.
Pleasure, Abe. Thank you.
Likewise.
Wonderful.
And enjoy.